Recording.
Alright. Hi, I'm Samantha, this is Amanda, and that's Andrew, and we're going to do Chapter 14, Youth, Crime, and Justice in a Changing Society. The author is Rebecca Manglia, and our pages were 180 through 187. For our presentation, we're going to start on the outline. We're going to go through some author information, the key terms, summary of the chapter, important facts and main ideas, the bias, additional information, and then the references. Our author was Rebecca Manglia, and she presented different chapters in the book, so we feel as a group that she had enough information to present this chapter. And then we're going to go over some key terms. If you guys have any questions, just raise your hand. In the summary, juvenile crime is more complicated than society portrays. It has demanded public attention due to the link between childhood and innocence. This article focuses on the juvenile justice movement, juveniles as both offenders and victims, and other emerging issues that the youth face.
Once again, I'm Andrew, and this is the important facts, history of juvenile justice movement. And some of the key points thought were that youth were educated delinquent, which focus on rehabilitation rather than punitive for adults, like for punishment for adults. And juvenile records are confidential, and so it's not up for public inspection in adults. They can be out in the public. And another point is the youth have the ability to form mens rea, which is the mental component of criminal liability. And to be guilty of most crimes, the defendant must have committed a criminal act in a certain mental state. Basically, like juveniles, like 16, 17-year-old, their brain's not fully developed, they can't form. They don't have the mental capacity, and yep. And this is the differences between criminal and juvenile justice system. Some of the key points I thought were in the juvenile justice system, which on this side is juveniles educated delinquent, and they have a disposition hearing, which is the setting stage, which is purpose for rehabilitation or treatment. And they also have a thing called intermittent sentence, which is like a range. They can have a range of time during their trial, and you can find this on page 181 in your class textbook.
Juveniles as offenders. Adults commit the majority of crime in the United States. The juveniles only represent a small proportion of the overall crime rate. In 2005, juveniles, those under the age of 18, represented 9% of all arrests for homicide, and 1 in every 10 arrests for drug abuse. The highest proportion of juvenile crime was for robbery, which is about 25%. Public attention violates the norm with the connection that links childhood and adolescence with innocence. And in 2002, the juvenile homicide rate was the lowest it's ever been since 1984. In the mid-1980s and the mid-1990s, the juvenile homicide rate hit the all-time high, which resulted in the nationwide super predator. In 1992, every state but Nebraska responded by modifying existing waiver laws to make it easier for youth to be waived to the adult court, which means they would go through the adult trial and be tried as an adult. 29 states have passed legislation removing certain criminal offenses entirely from the jurisdiction of juvenile courts. And then juveniles as victims. The link between victimization and delinquency has always been recognized by society. In 2002, homicide was the 4th leading cause of the death for the youth ages 1 through 11. Statistics for the same year show that 10% of all murders in the United States involved juvenile victims. 33.3% were female and 47% were African American. Juvenile homicide victims ages 12 through 17 are most likely to know their offender and use a handgun. Children under 6 are more likely to be killed by a family member. Youth ages 12 through 17 are more than 2 times more likely as adults to be victims of non-fatal violent offenses. Males are more likely than females to be the victims. Youth in urban areas are at higher risk than those in rural areas. Juvenile males are 4 times more likely to successfully commit suicide than females, and white juveniles are at greater risk than African Americans or Hispanic youth, and Native American youth have the highest suicide rate, nearly double that of their white juveniles.
My name is Amanda, and my section in the chapter was Special Populations and Emerging Issues. Arrests for girls have been declining since 1995, and they still remain higher than they have been historically. From 1994 to 2003, arrest rates for girls neither increased more or less than arrest rates for boys. Percentage of juvenile crime committed by girls has risen from 20% in 1980 to 29% in 2003. A concerted number of girls involved with more violent offenses such as aggravated and simple assaults. Girls accounted for 18% of juvenile arrests, and for violent index crimes in 2005, 32% of aggravated assaults and 24% of simple assaults. In the past, girls have not been involved in violent offenses. This led to debates about whether the increase reflects changes in girls offending or differences in the systematic processing of girls. In 2003, the amount of aggravated assaults arrests, 33% were against family members, whereas it was 18% for boys. In 1992, the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act was reauthorized. It required states to analyze their state systems for gender bias. It started in the early 1990s. States have begun to address the inequalities by designing specialized female responsive intervention for girls. Recent research confirms that sexual victimization is a meaningful risk factor that causes female delinquency. This is the important facts for mental health. Recent studies show that as many as 60 to 70% of juveniles brought to juvenile court nationwide have at least one recognizable mental health diagnosis. Many juvenile justice systems are unable to offer the intensive mental health treatment necessary to address the conditions. Only about 50% of juvenile justice agencies have services available to address young mental health concerns. Juvenile gang involvement peaked in the mid-1990s. Even though gang involvement has been on the decline, it still remains an important predictor of juvenile criminality and juvenile victimization. They've been showing a steady decline since the early 1990s, particularly in towns smaller than 50,000 people. Urban communities with large minority populations were more at risk for successful gang recruitment. All reported juvenile members, 94% were male, 49% were Hispanic, and 37% were African American. Only about 1% of all youth ages 10 to 17 were involved in gang activity in 2002, and they were mostly from poor and urban communities. For minority overrepresentation, given their percentage in the population at large, too many Hispanic, African American, and Native American youth have been arrested or are currently under the care of the juvenile justice system. African American juveniles represented only about 16% of the juvenile population for the years 1980 through 2002. They accounted for 47% of homicide victims, and African American youth are 4 times more likely to be victims of homicide than white youth. According to the UCR, in 2003, African American juveniles represented 63% of the juvenile arrests for aggravated assault. There's debate between researchers to the cause of overrepresentation. Some say that it represents the higher number of black youth involved in serious crime, or at least a higher number of serious offenders among African Americans involved in crime. Some say that the issue is more related to the active policing in urban minority neighborhoods. The next is the LGBT issues. Studies show that LGBT youth are at least 3 times more likely to commit suicide than non-LGBT youth. 20 to 40% of homeless youth are LGBT, and this is due to the issues their parents keep them out. It's related to their sexual identity or their sexual orientation. 42% of LGBT youth that reside in out-of-home placements are usually there because they were kicked out or removed from their home. LGBT youth are more likely to be victims of violence because of their sexual orientation, and this includes physical attacks and harassment at school. Child Welfare League of America was created best practice guidelines for those providing services for LGBT youth offenders. First document of its kind addresses issues such as the identification of practices that victimize LGBT youth and specialized issues related to the classification and housing of LGBT youth, particularly those with transgender issues.
This is juvenile service providers, and this is this process called teen courts, which does reduce the number of first cases. And basically, youth are heard by a jury of their peers to work with the offender to create an appropriate sentence or consequence. And according to authors, some of the studies have found that jury members experience increased levels of self-efficacy and knowledge of the law and legal processing. And basically, self-efficacy, which I didn't know, is a person belief like I can or I cannot, their belief. And according to her, at the time, there was as many as 800 teen courts presently operating in the United States, handling thousands of juvenile cases each year. And this is our bias, and this bias is just on the previous slide I just said. And I found that according to the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, they found that different findings on the teen court effectiveness that the author presented. Basically, they had an experimental design to examine the effectiveness of teen courts, and they found less favorable results than our author did. And they suggested that the restorative justice elements of the teen courts program, such as the use of peers throughout the process, may not reduce or prevent recidivism of use than the traditional form. And for example, youth in the program may be embarrassed by their peers witnessing the experience of or the program, may succeed at shaming but not at all reintegrating use. Basically that they're embarrassed to present in front of youth and they're just ashamed of what they've done. And this website just found that, which is a .gov website, found a different opinion than our author found.
For additional information, we're going to talk about juvenile sexting, which is youth sending or posting sexual suggestive text messages or imaging, including nude or semi-nude photographs via cell phones or over the internet. Juvenile sexting has been increasing frequently, and a recent study found that 22% of girls and 18% of boys sent naked or semi-nude images of themselves or had them posted online. One in every six teens ages 12 through 17 who have cell phones have received naked or nearly nude pictures over text from someone that they know. For an example, two stories that I found were an 18-year-old high school student, an 18 high school graduate student. He graduated high school, he committed suicide. She sent a nude photo to her boyfriend from her cell phone. Within minutes, the picture circulated the high school, and hundreds of teens in her school had the picture. And then also, a 15-year-old boy received 12 months probation for forwarding a picture of his genitals to a 13-year-old girl. Law enforcement officers and prosecutors face increased pressure about how to handle these cases as effectively as possible. And tragic circumstances can be risk factors like suicide notes, adults can participate in this activity, and aggressive prosecution of all juvenile sexting cases are also a problem. And then we found legislation involving sexting. In 2012, 13 states introduced a bill aimed at sexting where minors send sexual, explicit, or nude or semi-nude photos by their cell phones. 4 states enacted legislation. They were Hawaii, South Dakota, New York, and Pennsylvania.
And these are some updated statistics I want to show you from the ojjdp.gov website. And these stats are from the year 2011. And the first one is the known juvenile offenders that were committed in the U.S. You can see the goes by year. The light blue is juveniles and adults, the white is juveniles only, and the dark blue is juvenile, only one juvenile committed the offense. So you can take a look at that. And then this is the homicide offending vary by sex. which you can see that this is in the year 2011. Between 1980 and 2011, this was done, and you can see that males committed far more offenses than female, and females stayed consistent, and males are, in 1995, there was a peak for some reason. This is varied by race, and 2011, and you can see the difference between black, white, or other race. Let me take a look at that.
And then our reference.